Hi, this is Allison Sheridan of the NosillaCast podcast, hosted at podfeet.com, a technology geek podcast with an ever so slight Apple bias. Today is Sunday, March 23rd, 2025, and this is show number 1037. Well, we're down at Lindsay and Nolan's house right now and watching their kids while they're off on a 10-year anniversary little vacation in Costa Rica. You might notice a little difference to my audio as a result. I'm actually using an Audio-Technica 2100X, I think it's called these days. It's a mic I've had before. I had a real old one, and I decided it just simplifies everything for the road. So I'm just using it through USB-C, and I think it sounds okay. It's not quite the high LPR 40, but it'll do in a pinch. In our previous installment of Programming by Stealth, Bart taught us how to install Ruby, install Bundler, install gems, and then build a very simple website using Jekyll as our static site generator, and had that website actually show up in GitHub. In this most recent installment of our Jekyll mini-series, Bart explains Jekyll's build process, which is mostly automated by how you name things and the content of the files you create, like adding YAML front matter. Then we spent some quality time bemoaning how the Jekyll developers reuse the word assets to mean two different things. Bart avoids some of the associated confusion by creating some naming conventions of our own. We get to do a worked example where we learn a little bit about pages in Jekyll and do a few things the hard way that we'll redo the easy way in the upcoming installments. If you're following along real time, note we will not be recording another episode of Programming by Stealth for 6 weeks because of a birthday celebration for actually on both sides of the pond, and my trip to Japan. But of course, you can find Programming by Stealth number 178 at a link in the show notes, or in your podcatcher of choice, or of course at pbs.bartificer.net. Our first CES interview this week is going to be from the giant show floor. As is often the case, the person staffing the booth was reticent to do an interview as she'd never done one before. It's not like being at the press events. Those people are ready to be recorded and interviewed in lots of ways. You might want to go watch the video of this next one, as it's a giant piece of equipment that's pretty dramatic to see. We are possibly interviewing someone about we're definitely interviewing them, but we're interviewing them about possibly the largest piece of equipment I've seen here. We are looking at a giant underwater remote-controlled construction equipment, piece of equipment. And I'm here with Madeline Pierce, who's going to tell us a little bit about it. So what was the problem that this was designed to solve?
So this helps with underwater dredging.
What do we dredge for?
You're just removing material from the river.
Yeah, but I think there's something, it's a climate problem, helping with it.
So you can help restore ecosystems or help prepare for natural disasters.
Oh, okay, all right. So what we're looking at, it looks like it should be, it looks like one of my grandson's little construction equipments, but this thing is massive. It's, like 30 feet long? And I see a pole sticking up out of it. What's the pole for?
So the pole is for GPS. It helps communicate with the teleremote controller.
Oh, okay. So we've got somebody with a little remote control, little joystick that's driving all of this, right? And so that must limit the depth you can get to with this.
Yeah. So this can be operated up to 7 meters underwater.
Oh, that's still pretty big. And if you're doing a river, that's probably, I guess there's big rivers we should talk about, but yeah. Now, this isn't the first one of these Komatsus made.
No, so there was a diesel mechanical version that has been made since the 70s, and it had a snorkel to allow for air to get to the engine.
So that limits it even more on depth, right?
Yeah. And eventually we want this to get to 50 meters.
Oh, wow. Now, how would you do that over what you're doing today?
They want to remove the GPS mast, so it'll be tethered with a buoy at the top above the water to help communicate with the controller.
Wow. One of the first questions Steve asked when we got in here was, how did they get this into CES? Because I'm guessing this weighs a couple of pounds, too. Do you have any idea how much it weighs?
It weighs 30,000 kilograms.
Oh, holy cow. This thing is really impressive. Well, I love the idea of this. This is all electric then, right?
Yes, completely electric.
Forgot to mention that. So it's every little girl's dream to be able to drive a piece of construction equipment underwater. I think this is really cool. Thank you for joining us.
All right, thank you.
Before I play the next set of CES interviews, I got to tell you a funny story. I've mentioned that we get most of the interviews during 3 press events: CES Unveiled, PepCom, and Showstoppers. These events are held in hotel ballrooms, and we usually hang out with Dave Hamilton, Chuck Joyner, Pilot Pete, and Norbert Frasa before and after the events. I think it was on the third day when we went to Showstoppers that for some reason we weren't with our merry gang. So Steve and I were on our own to navigate to the hotel and find the room. Some of the events require you to pick up a badge before entering, so we weren't surprised when there was a table to do just that. Oddly, the woman helping us said she didn't see our names. She wasn't perturbed and just printed us badges anyway. We went into the ballroom and started our usual wandering of the aisles of vendors, searching for interesting products to learn about. The first one of those interviews you're going to hear is with PlugP2P. Now, Steve found this booth and was very excited to have me chat with the founders about an innovative solution for EV charging. After we interviewed them, we found a few more interesting products and we did more interviews. But we started noticing a couple of strange things. First of all, they were all about the automotive industry. Secondly, they were all talking about Michigan. We even found a booth up front with a giant map of Michigan on the wall. We went to talk to the woman staffing the booth, and being from Michigan myself, we had a nice chat. I learned from her that her organization is trying to get more businesses to invest in the state of Michigan, specifically in transportation. So, okay, that explains why the heavier than expected automotive angle this year. Finally, after the fourth person I talked to, I noticed that every person that we'd been talking to had used a word I didn't recognize. The word was COVESA. I asked the last person, "What the heck is this word? Well, I keep hearing people say COVESA. What does that mean?" He gave me kind of a blank stare of confusion and said, COVESA is the sponsor of this event? We weren't at Showstoppers at all. We'd gone into the wrong room. This also explains why I hadn't seen any of our usual gang, or Tom Merritt and Rob Dunwood, who were also there, and the rest of the DTNS crew, who should have been in the room. We usually run into them as we're wandering around. This also explains why the women out front didn't have badges for us. We actually got 2 really good interviews that you're going to hear tonight, and then we went on to Showstoppers for the rest of the evening. With that, let's learn all about PlugP2P. We're big fans of electric vehicles, and we really believe in being able to charge anywhere. And one of the problems to be solved is, what if you're, going to a ball game or something like that and you need to charge, but you also need to park? And it's possible that PlugP2P might have the answer to this. So I'm talking to Ann Campbell, the founder of PlugP2P, and she's going to tell us all about their idea of how this can be solved.
Yes, okay, great. Thank you for stopping by. PlugP2P is a mobile app that helps connect people who own an EV charging device, and it could be an electrical outlet because most people have a mobile charger, or it can be an actual, Tesla charger or a J1772 charger. So we connect people who own those charging devices. They use them a couple times a week. They just sit there unused most of the time. There are over 4 million of them in the US today. And we want to sort of create a marketplace so that people who have a charger and people who need a charger can find each other. And, we think this is going to be really helpful to people who drive EVs because they charge at home most of the time. But sometimes, they could be visiting someone, they could be going to a game somewhere, they might be spending the afternoon at the park at a soccer game, and it would be nice if they could just kind of park across the street or down the street or around the block and let their vehicle charge while they're sitting there watching that football game for 4 hours. And everybody wins,
So wait a minute, we're all larcenists, so we want the money. So I've got a Tesla charger in my car, in my garage, and I'm a nice person, but I pay 52 cents a kilowatt hour during the peak time and 26 during the off time. So I'm going to want some compensation. What's your idea there?
So you set your calendar, you set your price, you get to decide. The host is in full control of the situation. When someone wants to come to your house to charge, you can decide to accept or decline that charge event. And they know what your calendar is. They know how much you charge. And you're going to charge. Market discovery is something that we enable. So if you can charge $20 an hour during that football game that's right around the corner from your house, you're going to do that, and you should do that. And guests will be able to do that. Because
they're also parking their car, aren't they?
Absolutely. So it's a win-win for everybody. And, our app will allow you to kind of discover what people are willing to pay. And you should be compensated because you're sharing your property, you're giving them an electric charge. So there's really a win-win benefit all around by using our app.
Okay,
so PlugP2P.com.
So check it out. That's really perfect. You're ready to wind this up, and I've still got more excitement about this. So I like the idea that I get to set the charging. So if it's a children's soccer game across the street, I might get $1 an hour, but if it's I'm at SoFi Stadium, I'm down the block there, I'm going to get banked for that because I'm not allowing them to park and charge their electric vehicle at the same time.
That's right. And if you're at a highway exit ramp, you might get $20 an hour, whereas, on Memorial Day weekend and somebody really needs to charge, it could be an electrical outlet. You don't even have to own an EV charger. So you as a host, there are people who drive EVs that have mobile chargers that plug into a regular electrical outlet. You just need to have it checked by an electrician, make sure it's safe, and we do ask you those questions. And so we just want it to be a really positive, outstanding experience for everybody.
That's interesting. So you're only going to get maybe 5 or 6 miles per hour of charge on a 110 outlet, but if they also get parking during an event like that, that's worth money. That's interesting. So I might not even be somebody who owns an electric vehicle, doesn't even have a charger, but I've got an outlet, or maybe I've got a dryer outlet, maybe they've got the charger, so some things like that. So you've built the infrastructure for all of this math to be done, so I don't have to worry my pretty little head about how to do it, but all I do is set the charge.
That's right. You just you tell us what
I said charge. Charge, I meant money.
That's right. You decide your schedule. You decide how much you want to charge, and you put it out there. It's like you're selling something on eBay or Airbnb or Uber. This is what I have to offer. This is what I want to charge, and then you find matches. Like guests will be able to find you if you have what they need. And the beauty of a marketplace is it allows buyers and sellers to find each other and negotiate a price.
Oh, very good.
And so if you set your price at $50 an hour and you get no customers, you know that if I want to be in this business, I got to drop my price. Some weekends you might be able to get $50 an hour. Some weekends it might be 2 or 5 or 3, whatever it is. You'll find out.
I love this. So the site is PlugP2P.com, peer-to-peer.com, and But I'm sorry, is this already available today?
So we're launching in the next couple of months. We've been working on the software for about a year now. We're putting the final bells and whistles on it. We want it to be a really amazing user experience. And we think everybody's going to love it when we get it out there. So it'll be downloadable on in the Apple Store and the Android Play Store. It's for iOS and Android. So look for it in a couple of months. But you can go to plugp2p.com to get us your email. We'll let you know when it's going to be launched so we can keep you in the loop. You can sign up, and you can either be a charge guest, a charge host. You can be both. And, we're just going to create this awesome ecosystem so that people can find each other and start EV charging and solve this big problem that the whole society is dealing with.
This is fantastic, Ann. I expect a personal phone call when this all goes live, but this is great. One more time I'm going to plugp2p.com.
You'll learn all about it. You can email us. We'll answer any questions. Give us your email, and we'll keep you posted when we go live.
Perfect. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
When Bart and I hatched our plan for him to teach me and the audience how to program, he called it programming by stealth for a very specific reason. His plan was to sneak up on us by teaching us a single language first, and then when we weren't noticing, keep adding to our toolkit until we turned around one day and realized we were developers. He started with simple HTML to create web pages, then some CSS to style our web pages. But what fun is a web page without some JavaScript to make it do things? Over the years, Bart has continued to build on the lessons learned from before while introducing new concepts and new languages to us. He isn't teaching us languages. He's teaching us how to think like developers. He's teaching us that powerful tools are within our reach. He's teaching us how to learn. Long before programming by stealth was a twinkle in our eyes, I remember people raving about how fun it was to automate things. I wanted to be one of the cool kids who did that, but for the life of me, I couldn't think of anything I needed automated. Now I feel like everywhere I look, there's some tedious task to be eliminated and improved. It's like I got a pair of glasses that let me see what was there all along. Now, while I've accomplished some complicated things that make me quite proud, sometimes it's the little things that just make me feel just all warm and fuzzy. Let me give you a tiny but lovely example. Creating video tutorials for screencasts online is a lot of work, and the software we use to record, edit, and produce the videos, ScreenFlow, is a bit twitchy and unreliable at times. To combat the fear of losing all my work, I store my ScreenFlow file locally, and every time I finish a chunk of work on it, maybe it might be 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes worth of work, I make a copy of that file to a folder in Dropbox. Since I'm creating multiple files of the same name, I need to differentiate them. For a long time, I manually appended the date and time to the end of the file's name. For example, let's say I'm working on a tutorial for Audacity, the one I just finished, and I make a copy of the file at 4:55 p.m. on March 15th. I would change the name to Audacity 2025-03-15, then 1655.screenflow. A few years ago, as my automation chops were heating up, I decided to automate it a bit by using a text expander snippet. In Text Expander, there's a little calendar icon and a clock icon. Each of those will place little tokens that will automatically insert the date and time. Under the calendar, you can drop in the year in, say, YYYY format, another one for the month is MM, and the day is DD. I chose to put dashes between them to make it look nice. The clock does the same kind of thing with hour, minute, and second. My saves are far enough apart that the seconds aren't important, so my appended text is just HHMM. With this fancy text expander snippet, I can make a copy of the Audacity file in Dropbox, hit Enter to select the text of the file name, Command right arrow to get to the end of the name, hit the space bar, and then type my text expander abbreviation to append the date and time. I was quite pleased with my new automation. I went happily along with that solution for years, but just last week I started wondering, is there a way to do it even more automatically? Hazel from Noodlesoft is a fantastic app whose job is to watch folders and then take action on those files when they arrive in those folders. I've been automating things with Hazel for ages, but for some reason, it just hadn't occurred to me to use it for this automation. Something about the way Bart has been layering tool after tool on the Programming by Stealth audience just kind of starts your brain working differently. Hazel has a couple of ways I could automate my appended date and time to my copied ScreenFlow files. For both methods, you start by telling Hazel, which folder do you want to watch? Then you add rules to the folder and you name them. I called my rule add date. I know I'm inventive that way. All right, next you tell Hazel the conditions under which it should apply the rule. For this tutorial, my main file will simply be called audacity.screenflow. So my condition is to simply be that it only apply the rule to files of that exact name. Now, I can't have it look generically for any files ending in, say, .screenflow, because the copies that are renamed with that date will also end in .screenflow. Hazel would just keep appending the date and time indefinitely to all files. I'll have to change this condition for the next tutorial I create, and perhaps there might be a way to automate even that step, but changing it once for every 2-week project is not onerous. Now that we've taught Hazel how to recognize the file to rename, we need to tell Hazel how to append the date and time under the heading, Do the following to the match file or folder. Hazel has built-in tokens for just this purpose that are very similar to what you see in Text Expander. There's a drop-down I changed to rename, and then it offers with pattern. To the right, it automatically drops in 2 tokens, name and extension. With that default, it would rename it with the same name and the same extension. Clicking into this area pops up a window where you can add all kinds of other tokens. For my needs, I wanted the date added token, and from there, I can use the edit pattern option to the token to define exactly how I want to define the date and time to look. It's really easy. Now, I'm going to make a little confession. I didn't use this easy drag and drop interface of Hazel with its little tokens. I was busy working on my video tutorial, so I outsourced the solution to my assistant, Claude.ai. Claude suggested I use Hazel's ability to run a script instead and offered me an Apple script to perform the same function. I've had experience with Apple script, enough of it to understand what Claude wrote for me, so I felt confident it wasn't going to do any damage if it made a mistake. Claude adds comments for each function, making it pretty easy to understand what it's doing. Now, I'm not going to go through the script it wrote, but I put the full text of the script into the show notes if you're interested. Now, I know this is an itty-bitty automation created with a simple drag-and-drop interface or a 6-line Apple script if you're fancy, but every single time it renamed my file when I copied it into Dropbox, I smiled. You simply can't buy that kind of joy. Now, another fun automation I did recently involved using my Stream Deck for audio editing. I don't do a lot of fancy stuff with my Stream Deck, but I've programmed a few buttons that I use all the time. My favorite one is to switch from headphones to speakers for audio playback. A lot of podcasters heavily edit their audio, but I don't really do that, partly because I find it dreadfully boring and time-consuming. If I've just done an hour-long interview with someone, the last thing I want to do is go back and listen to it again, but more slowly. The other reason I don't do it is because most of my guests are clear and concise speakers who don't fumble for words. Bart is a great example. Off the cuff, he rarely makes any kind of a mistake or an or an If anyone makes ums and uhs, it's usually me. When I'm recording solo segments, I start and stop when I flub up, and I just delete the flub and jump back in. I find that much easier than trying to splice out mistakes. But a while back, I had Pat Dengler on the show, and afterwards, she was kind of sad. She was disappointed in how many ums and uhs she did. I decided to make her happy and remove as many as I could from the recording. In ScreenFlow, I have segments of me talking where it's not practical to stop and edit along the way as I do for the podcast, so in ScreenFlow, I do have to edit after the fact. But Don McAllister wrote a series of Keyboard Maestro macros that gives us keystrokes for editing. They're simply marvelous. My favorite one lets you select a region of the recording, and in one keystroke, it cuts, rewinds a smidge, and then plays. It's so fast to let you know whether you've done a good job on the cut, or maybe cut a word off too soon or too late. When I started editing my recording with Pat using my audio software Hindenburg, I really, truly missed Don McAllister's Keyboard Maestro macros. I'd drag across an in the waveform with my cursor, move my hands to the keyboard, hit Command X to cut the region, move my hand back to the trackpad, click to place the cursor where I wanted to start playing, move my hands back to the keyboard, and hit the spacebar to play. The tedium was overwhelming. Now, Bart has often talked about how the best programming is when you're scratching your own itch. This one itched real bad. But he has also instilled in us the faith in ourselves that we can probably automate our way out of the most annoying things that we're facing. You've heard me refer to Hindenburg about 358 times over the past years, but you'll notice I've never explained much about how it works or recorded a tutorial for Screencasts Online about it. That's because much of it is still mysterious to me, and I've never taken the time to buckle down and learn the whole darn thing. The good news is I pointed Jill from the Northwoods to Hindenburg early on in her podcasting journey, and she watched all of their videos and just consumed every bit she could to try to learn everything about Hindenburg. So now when I get stuck, I just ask her questions about Hindenburg. It's way easier than learning it yourself. Now my goal at this point was to replicate what I have over in ScreenFlow with Don's Keyboard Maestro macro. I wanted a single action to cut, rewind, and play. Cut is easy with Command X, but that rewind and play part was going to take some sleuthing. While Hindenburg is a highly complex and capable tool, I found out that much of its capability is hidden, so you have to know it's there and know what it's called in order to even search for it in the very annoying documentation. While preferences for Hindenburg are very meager, with only 3 tabs, on the middle tab called Interface, I found a setting called Pre-Roll Time in milliseconds, and it was set to 3000. And that kind of smelled like what I was looking for, like backup 3 seconds. Now, full 3 seconds rewind is way more than I would want, so I set it to 1000 for 1 second. Okay, that's great. But how do I make pre-roll go? This is a setting for how long, but how do I make it pre-roll? I flipped through every single menu in the menu bar, and there was absolutely no mention of this mythical pre-roll. One of the reasons Hindenburg is so difficult to learn is that there is no user manual to speak of. Instead, they have little video guides with no words, just music playing while they show you something. I like a video tutorial as much as the next woman, but they're really hard to search. I eventually found the right video, and after all that searching for how to activate pre-roll, they typed in text on top of the video the letter P. Oh, geez, that could have been a menu bar item, couldn't it? Well, armed with how to cut with Command X and how to pre-roll with P to hear the audio after the cut, I added a multi-action button to my Stream Deck. I named it Cut plus Pre-roll because I'm inventive, as we've already mentioned in this episode. I dragged in 2 system hotkeys, one for Command X and one for the letter P. I tested the button, and it worked perfectly to cut and pre-roll my audio. I was so enchanted with the new button that I made another button, just a single action button for play pause, where the hotkey is just the spacebar. That might seem like a trivial button since the spacebar is pretty easy to use, but I found I could do my editing with my left hand on the Stream Deck and my right hand on the trackpad doing the selecting. It was easier to use my left hand to play pause than to give my right hand 2 different things to do. I was so excited about this itty-bitty little automation that I made a little video to show you that is, of course, in the show notes. In the video, my button has a generic icon, but I got frisky while writing up my joy about this automation for you, and I decided to make my own button. Stream Deck has a little web app that lets you make them for yourself, or you can choose from their library, but I wanted my own. I didn't see anything that inspired me in the library of icons, so I used the Noun project to find a nice icon of a pair of scissors and the letter P. In the Noun project that I've talked about before, you can choose a color for them for the icon that you've chosen, and I chose to make them red. I plopped them into the web app, and I made my little button icon. So it's basically just a pair of scissors and the letter P. Well, I got to tell you, this made me so happy. I didn't hate cutting all of the ums and uhs that Pat said. And while I was there, I get rid of all of mine. And I think I might have done more than she did. Again, it's the automation giving me joy that I really want to get across to you. Here's my last example. Back in 2016, I wrote an article about a little app I wrote for myself to add drop shadows to my images for the blog posts. If you look back on my posts from back then, the images look pretty fuzzy, but they do have a nice drop shadow. Since then, Helma helped me add some CSS code, that's cascading style sheets, to my theme so that any image I upload has a drop shadow. And with Mars Edit, I can tell it to double the resolution, so that's why all of the images now look really crisp. I bring all this up because I got a comment on my article from 2016 just a week or so ago. The person's name is Scott, and he was asking for help getting my little drop shadow app to work. This required some real dusting off of the old brain cells as I reread my own post on how I created it. There's an open source library called ImageMagick, with a K, that does most of the work on the command line, but I used Automator to package the ImageMagick script into an app. I explained how to build this yourself, but I also gave a download of my Automator app. Scott was getting an error when he ran the download, and he posted the error. Now, if you ask me what I did last week, I pretty much can't tell you. I could definitely not tell you what I talked about on the podcast last week, so the chance I'd be able to remember what I did 9 years ago was pretty slim. If it weren't for Bart instilling this love of coding, that itch Scott put in my brain to figure out would have gone unscratched. Instead, I spent a short bit of time asking Claude what Scott's error was trying to tell us, and a long bit of time writing an addendum to my article, and enhancing my app quite a bit. The easy answer was that Scott hadn't selected a file before asking the app to add the drop shadow. Now, the long answer is that it was never going to work under macOS Sequoia because of a permission dance he would need to do to use it. Oh, and if you're on Apple Silicon, my shell script inside Automator wouldn't work either. I only knew that because I discovered a while back on another coding project that Homebrew moved where it installs apps with the switch to Apple Silicon. As I worked through writing up the addendum instructions, I was very frustrated that I hadn't put in a full screenshot of the Automator app into the show notes, so I was kind of guessing at parts of it. Since 2016, I've discovered both Shotter and CleanShot X, which will take scrolling screenshots, so I was able to use one of them to add the entire Automator screenshot in all its glory to the addendum. That way, if somebody didn't want to download and run an app from a clearly unidentified developer, they could rebuild it themselves. Now, after I added the 2025 update to the article, I was very proud of myself, and I commented on the blog post to alert Scott that I'd answered his questions. And wouldn't you know it, after thanking me quite profusely, he asked for an enhancement to the app. Since he'd hit a brick wall when he tried double-clicking on the downloaded app, he asked whether I could make it politely ask for a file instead of throwing an incomprehensible error. Well, that sounded like fun, right? I didn't go as far as Scott asked, mostly because I got lazy, but I think I addressed the spirit of his request. Now, if you double-click on the app, instead of throwing an incomprehensible error, it simply tells you to drag a file onto the app for it to add the drop shadow. I had a lot of fun dusting off this 9-year-old project, and it made me feel good that Scott was getting value out of it. If you'd like to try my little drop shadow app for yourself, you can download it with its README file at the link in the show notes. Now, back to the point of the story. Before Bart and I started programming by stealth in October of 2015, I was simply someone who wished they could think up something to automate. After nearly a decade of Bart giving us this slow and steady instruction in so many languages, tools, and concepts, everywhere I look, I see opportunities to automate. While I'm working on these automations, and when I succeed, I feel really good. I feel accomplished. I feel powerful. I have all the feels. I'm in the MOTER booth, MOTER, with Off Waswasi, and the pitch here says MOTER is the bridge between automakers, and insurers. So I'm thinking this is going to be controversial and awesome. What do you have to tell us about today, Off?
So basically, we get our data from the car using COVESA standard signals, and then our SDK libraries, the software we create, basically, we have driver scoring, driver coaching, and then accident and event detection. So basically, you have our software in the car, and as you drive for each trip, it would score you and check your driving behavior.
I don't like that. I'm a terrible driver.
So that'll help you become a better driver and safer also.
So does it gamify it? Is that part of it?
So think of it as every time you drive better, your score increases, so you pay less premium. That's the idea.
So as I'm driving, and actually it's very strange for Steve and me that we're watching the video. The videos are all with cars driving right where we live or in our neighborhood. So I've got this system in my car, and I'm going to be driving along. I'm paying attention. I'm not paying attention. I'm going to get a score. And whatever I do is being reported to my insurance company.
No. So whatever you do is going to go to the cloud, where for now it's mostly rideshare rentals, like fleets, similar like that. And then, so imagine a fleet manager wants to see who are his best drivers and worst drivers. So you can easily go look at the data, see each driver's scoring and their driving events like speeding, tailgating, hard braking, all accidents if they cause any. And
I'm okay as long as somebody else is getting monitoring, just not me.
But it doesn't go directly to an insurance company.
Oh, it does not? Oh,
No,
okay.
It doesn't go right away. So that's another thing. Like it would depend on the customer. So one of our customers, for example, is a non-emergency medical, non-emergency fleet. So like not 911, but those, someone wants to go to the hospital, someone's on a wheelchair, and they need those. We install those in their vehicles also to monitor how good those drivers are. Because maybe like someone elderly, someone is sick or injured, and so
make sure they're safe.
Yeah, basically make sure the driver is not driving recklessly or.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about how this works. I see two pieces of hardware here. I see a cluster module and a console map. I got a bunch of wires. I got some Ethernet going on here. What is all this hardware?
So imagine these are the car infotainment systems in the middle. And so our product is basically the software that's installed in these. So that one over there acts like the car ECU sending the signals to the car software. And then our software is in there. So it scores the driver and also sends driver coaching messages and information. So all you have to do is just turn on your car and start driving. And it takes care of it.
So this is hardware simulation we're looking at right here. This is not something I've got to install in my car if I'm one of these drivers.
Like imagine this is a car and that's another car.
I got you. So we see somebody driving along and maybe they're not paying attention to the road. It's going to give them some sort of signal to say, hey, you want to look back at the road and you're watching the score.
Speeding right now. So the driver was speeding. So you get that recorded. And then sometimes like a lane departure if they go. And then you can go back and look at your trip, see what happened. Like you look at what caused your score to drop or increase.
So this is, at this point, you're looking at companies that you can partner with to put this in cars for, say, if you could get Uber to do it, or, well, that doesn't work as well because it's not really a fleet, but maybe somewhere where they control the vehicle, right?
Yeah, we want to support as many different platforms as we can so that our software they can just install it and then do whatever they want to do with the...
It's got a little Big Brother on it. I'm not gonna lie, little bit, but I don't know. Again, my premise is humans shouldn't be driving at all. So if this helps us to be better drivers, maybe that's the right thing.
It's I would say it's on your side, then it's against you. It's more to help the driver than actually be taxing to the driver.
Butter side up.
Butter side.
All right. Thank you very much, Off. This is very interesting. The company name is MOTER, MOTER. If people wanted to learn more, where would they go?
MOTER.ai.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Have you been enjoying your ad-free feed of the NosillaCast and all of the other lovely shows here at the PodFeed Podcast? They may be ad-free, but they aren't cost-free. If you'd like to help us keep these shows funded, please consider becoming a patron by going to podfeed.com/Patreon. Well, the delightful Adam Engst of Tidbits is back again with us this week, and he, in the last couple of weeks, has let me help him conduct some experiments trying to find the accuracy levels of different AI's ability to do transcription. And today we're going to start by exploring his findings, but I have a feeling we're going to wander off that path as well.
Gee, are you suggesting that I don't usually stay on topic? But
I love our nonlinear conversations.
Yeah. Nonlinear is the way to go, man. Okay. Yeah. So what happened was is when Apple introduced the audio transcription feature in Notes, I thought, well, that's a great idea. Why wouldn't you want to record a presentation you were at or you were listening to or something like that and then get a transcript of it? I mean, I'm a journalist, right? Like I need to check what people say and not go on my memory. And so I did this and then like the rabbit hole just started. He was like, there's Audio Hijack. It can do transcription too. And, but wait, Notes works on the Mac and the iPhone. I wonder if those are different. And then you told me about Mac Whisper. And I'm like, well, clearly I better check Mac Whisper too. And so I kind of got this idea that I could figure out the accuracy level of one of these things. This turned out to be vastly harder than I'd anticipated because what is accurate, right? So what I'd been recording was Apple presentations, because they're relatively clean. Like at first, like the WWDC, and iPhone releases, they're clean, right? I mean, those are scripted, but there's no transcripts of them that you can just download. So, but then, an Apple earnings call, the first part is scripted, but then you get into all the back and forth with the analysts and it just goes off the rails. So it all worked, but how do you check how accurate it is? And then I remembered that NPR does transcripts for, all their shows, at least some of their shows. And so I found a shortwave podcast and, I had transcripts and everything like that. And I recorded it. Then, of course, I recorded it in multiple ways because if you want to use Notes, you actually have to literally record sound coming out of a speaker. Whereas Audio Hijack can just suck in the digital sound without actually ever playing it. Mac Whisper needs files, right. So I record it in all these ways, and then I transcribed it, and then again started trying to figure out how do you compare. And I actually started with ChatGPT, which gave me some answers that, they looked plausible at first, but every time I asked in a slightly different way, I got wildly different answers.
Oh, you were asking it which one of these two is more accurate?
Yeah, because I had the official one.
Did you give it the audio file too?
No. I just gave it the transcripts. So I said, here's the official transcript, and here's 5 others. Compare them on, how many words are different, how the punctuation is different, capitalization, that kind of stuff.
Okay. Trying to give it some sort of metrics?
Yeah. And eventually it said, it was calculating word error rate. And it turns out word error rate is a thing. So this is what I didn't know. It turns out word error rate is an equation of, let's see, it's the substituted words, the missing words, and the inserted words divided by the total number of words in the official version.
Okay.
So it doesn't worry about punctuation, doesn't worry about capitalization, things like that. In theory.
Good.
And so that helped a lot because then I had something I could tell it to do, which it sort of knew how to do, and then it became consistent. Okay. And it also, I learned that there were calculators that you could just paste in two transcripts and it would calculate this for you.
The WER?
Yeah, the word error rate. None of them agreed. It was driving me up the wall. And they were ballpark, and they sort of went in the same order. This one was more accurate than that one, and things like that. But they never agreed on the numbers. Just about.
Let me ask: is it a percentage?
Yes.
So, how close were they in percentage? I mean, word error rate would be 5%, 3%. It'd be a small number, hopefully.
They were all within 1 to 4% difference.
Okay, but you wanted scientific evidence.
It just seemed a little fuzzy to me. So I'm like, come on. And what I realized eventually was this was a fool's errand. And I was the fool. Always get her while she's drinking. I
was drinking coffee right when he said that. It did not come out of my nose, but close.
So the problem was I actually did a error check on the official transcript. So I played the audio and read along with it. Luckily, it was only like 12 minutes or something, so I was able to do
I was going to say, that's really the only metric that you could do, that you could trust,
Right.
is really, I'm reading it, I'm looking at it, I can tell what it's saying, right?
And you know what? There were at least 4 errors in the official transcript.
Oh.
They were missing words. And those were errors that were true errors. There were other ones which I realized suddenly, well, now there's decisions you have to make. So if I say, just right there, I said, so if I make.
Right.
I repeated the word so. Should a transcript include that?
If
Right?
you want to be technically accurate, yes. If you want it to be good for the reader, definitely not.
No. And so, yeah. So it turns out that Notes, both on Mac and iOS, is pretty verbatim.
Okay.
If you repeat a word, it will pick it up twice. Audio Hijack and Mac Whisper, which actually both use Whisper behind the scenes,
Okay.
they're like, you don't really need to see this.
Yeah, I've actually really appreciated that in the interviews that I do with at CES. I am not very articulate in those interviews. I'm often repeating something, or I'm going, and it's just not there in the
You
transcript.
sound great. You sound great. I've listened to some of those. But yeah,
I listen to them and I'm
right.
just like, oh man.
So it turns out that I went in thinking this was a computer problem. You know, like one of those, you plug in the numbers and it spits out an answer and you're done. Like
You can do a graph, you can do math.
You could do right. Like there should be a number.
Sure.
And what I came to realize, and I mean, there's still some useful information that came out of it, that I did get this nice chart and a table of all the things, and was able to come to some conclusions. Mac Whisper is probably the best, sort of unsurprisingly, given that's what it does. Interestingly, Notes in iOS and Notes on macOS are different. macOS does better.
Really?
Yeah, don't know why.
Well, maybe it's
same
running
recording.
locally. Maybe it's running
It is
locally.
running locally.
And it's
Oh, it is running locally.
RAM-based and that sort of thing. I don't know.
Who knows? Very interesting. So, that's on an iPhone 16 Pro versus an M1 MacBook Air. So maybe even a different Mac might make a difference. I don't know.
I asked you about that when I did it because I was running it on my M3 MacBook Pro and on my M2 MacBook Air, and I was asking you whether you thought it would be different, and we didn't think it would be, but maybe.
Again, I just don't know. And that's sort of what this is coming down to is that we're seeing that more and more of the world's problems, in some sense, don't have fixed, easy answers. We've moved beyond fixed, easy answers. Those are all, we've solved those.
This is computers, though. It's got to be exact.
It's got to be exact. No, it doesn't. And the fact that there's these decisions that you have to make is part of why it's not exact. Even the 2 calculators where you just pasted in your text and they claim to calculate word error rate, they didn't agree. So clearly they'd made some different decisions on how to do this. And again, what is right? I don't know. They all agreed that when there were just exactly 4 errors, that they had the same, they all agreed on that. But as soon as you got into like actual real world situations, it was much trickier. And of course, that is professional audio from NPR. Like it's as good audio as you're going to get. It's an official transcript, which I believe was created by a person, at least to some extent, because the missing words were not missed by any of the AIs.
Oh, so these weren't just uhs and ums. They were
this
actual
was,
words.
This was missing. This was actually there was they were talking about something being an annual exercise.
Mm-hmm.
And I forget it was both annual or both annual and exercise or just one or just annual. But basically that word just disappeared from the official transcript.
Okay, which looks like,
and it was very
human
clear.
error.
Right, it was very clear in the audio. There was no reason for it to have been missed. So there were a few things like that.
You do realize how scary this is. Now you can tell the error. You can tell it's human because it made a mistake.
So it just became this really interesting kind of philosophical issue of like, well, what is the truth in some sense? What is the answer? And I've been thinking about this more and more because I've been using basically like the last year and few months, I've been using Perplexity, Arc Search, which has this AI-driven browse for me, and now ChatGPT to do searches. And so I've been looking more into this, like into the search space, and not so much in an official, like a comparative way where like, oh, let me run the search across all the 4 of them and see what happens. But just like, is it solving my problem? Is it answering my question?
Let me ask you a question. I don't know what people mean when they say using it as search. How is it different than giving it a prompt? That seems like the same thing.
Well, so Perplexity is just a search engine, right? I mean, or
it is. No, I don't know that.
99% of. Oh, okay. So Perplexity is a search engine. And so when you put a prompt into Perplexity, it's like typing a search into Google. It will do a search based on your prompt. Then it will collect all the results and it will use them as context to answer the question in your prompt.
How is that not just doing a prompt? That sounds like the same thing to me.
Oh, no, because imagine ChatGPT before I had access to the web, right?
Oh, well,
Perplexity is literally doing a search in the background, whereas ChatGPT before it had access to the web, all it could do was base its answer on its training model.
Okay. I didn't actually realize that had changed.
It's
not just using its training data. So it can answer current events now?
ChatGPT is doing full web searches when you ask. Perplexity always does them, or almost always does them. You can ask Perplexity to do certain things where it will just be generative AI because there's sort of no search involved. If you like, you could. I mean, Perplexity will do just write me a limerick kind of thing. But ChatGPT in the past was just completely the other side. It would only do generative AI, and only recently in November, I guess, did they open it up to search.
Okay, that explains some of the results I've been getting. I didn't notice a big shift, but now they think about it. Yeah,
you should be able to see it. It should say "searching the web" when you type in certain kind of prompts in ChatGPT, and then it will give you sources, because both of them will give you sources to what they found and incorporate it into their answer.
That's interesting. I know when I used to do it from the web interface, I used to see that, but in the app. I'm
not sure. I'm not using the app primarily. I'm not even sure I have it downloaded on my other machine. It doesn't. It only works in Apple Silicon, so I can't run it on my 27-inch iMac.
Okay.
So I'm just using ChatGPT in the browser and an Arc tab.
Okay. All right.
So and then just the third one is Arc Search, which is the iOS version of Arc, which like all my tabs are synced at all times, so that I can just tap and.
So Arc is a browser.
Arc is a browser, but they added this feature called Browse for Me, which is you type in your search, or they've got a very nice way to talk to it, and it does exactly what the others are doing. Whereas it goes out and does a search, runs your prompt against the context of that search, and then gives you answers with source links.
So when I go to just to my URL bar in Safari with my default set as Google for search, and I type in a term and it does that Gemini thing at the beginning, is that the same sort of search that you're talking about?
Honestly, not sure. I've given up on Google so long ago that I'm not really up on what they're doing these days. Brave Search, which I used until I switched to Perplexity for the couple of years before that. Brave Search does an AI summary, but it's so short that it's often not useful.
So you're okay. How are you doing? Let me guess. In Arc, the Arc web browser, does it allow you to choose Perplexity as one of the options for your search? Is that how you're using Perplexity?
I'm currently using ChatGPT, and I'm hesitating because I can't remember whether it lets you choose or if I like coded it in slightly. Because it's a Chromium browser, you can set up your own search engines very easily. And I can't remember if I did that. And I think with ChatGPT, I had to add an extension, a Chrome extension.
Okay, because in Safari, my only choices are Google, Yahoo, Bing, DuckDuckGo, and Ecosia, whatever that is. But I don't think I can choose.
Oh, don't use Ecosia. Horrible.
But I can't choose Perplexity.
No. You're limited to what Apple will let you do. So that's one of the reasons I don't use Safari. So, what's interesting about these is I feel like there's a bit of a sea change happening. So, I mean, do you remember using Archie and Veronica?
No, I remember the comic book when I was a little kid.
Yeah, so Archie was the search engine for FTP sites.
Oh wow!
In like the early 90s, Veronica was the search engine for Gopher sites. And then the web comes along, and then we get Alta Vista and Yahoo, and then eventually Google. But what was sort of interesting about the jump from like, you had this sort of interesting jump where like FTP sites, you had to, you could just navigate it was literally a file system. And, you just go into folders and there'd be more folders and documents there. Gopher, and then Turbo Gopher was the client from the University of Minnesota, sort of made that more fluid in the sense that you could have, you could be navigating through this Gopher space, which would have documents and whatnot, but it was still very much this hierarchical list, and you kind of go through. And then, of course, the web pops up, and suddenly we've got full text, right? And with links and everything. So it was that was the evolution. And this feels like it's sort of the next thing, where instead of finding a single page with text on it, it's finding a bunch of pages and collating their information in a way that it can then go get to the answer, so you don't have to go and look at each page to see if it actually answers your question.
Okay.
Because that was the big win of Google, right? PageRank, the idea of PageRank was that you were likely to get in the first couple of results the answer to your question.
Right.
And
that seems to have gone away.
Part of the reason why I don't use Google anymore. It has gone away. And part of it is also that I haven't thought this through, but I'm just saying this out loud. I wonder if keywords are no longer enough. In other words, we've been trained to do keyword searches. And so a keyword search, Google's going to go like, well, that's a keyword, and that's a keyword, and that's a keyword. Here's the pages that have those keywords on them, and that do all my other things in terms of being useful and blah, 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 so that they meet the page rank. And whereas what I find with the more AI-driven search engines is it's much more of a conversation, because it's more like a chatbot, right?
Sure.
So you don't usually give it just keywords. You usually say what it is you're trying to accomplish.
And that makes a difference in how it's going to answer. And
that makes a big difference because, of course, it's generative AI. So it's going to be doing the token, the next token lookup things. And the more you give it, the more those can be more statistically appropriate to actually meet the needs of the question.
Right. So you're saying this feels like a sea change to you. In what way?
Well, because in fact, and I understand the various issues underlying this, but the fact is when you do a search, you're trying to answer a question most of the time. I mean, there are searches that are no question, like our navigation. I just want to go to this website. I don't know what its URL is, so take me there. And then there are very simple fact searches. What is the world record in the mile? 343.13. But then there are a lot of things where the search is really starting something. So, for instance, I am looking for information about this particular model of GE refrigerator because I have one and it's not working in this particular way. Tell me what might be wrong.
Different. Yeah, that's really different. That's not something that's got to explore a lot to get to that answer.
It's got to explore a lot. And then it tells me what it thinks might be wrong. And I'm like, yeah, I don't think that's it because the freezer's still working. The bottom freezer's still working. So clearly the compressor's not gone. Oh, okay. Then let me adjust my answer to focus in on the other things that could be wrong. And I'm not saying that it's necessarily going to get the answer right, but it's a more exploratory and participatory approach to information gathering.
It's also like dealing with somebody who's pretty smart, but also has zero ego. So when you tell them,
yes.
yeah, no, this model doesn't have that kind of compressor, it goes, oh, yeah, you're right. I'm sorry. Let me approach this from a different way. And
unlike Siri, which never apologizes. So.
Yeah, that's really what it is. We just want her to apologize. I find that interesting because, yesterday I was playing with, I was using Claude to help me with some coding. And I told it what was going wrong, and it said, I said I wanted to do a certain thing, and it said, okay, here's how you could do that. And I said, yeah, that didn't work. And it goes, okay, I understand. Well, how about if you try this? And I did it again, and then it goes, yeah, clearly none of these paths are going to work. Let's take a whole new approach. And it wasn't upset and saying, well, why didn't it work? I don't know. It just came back and said, let's take another angle on this. You could hard code this thing, and here's how you could do it.
Infinitely patient. Yep.
Yeah.
Infinitely patient. And it's also, again, it is very important that these things provide sources because I hate the word hallucinate. I think it's a stupid word.
I do too.
They make mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
And they make mistakes, and partly they can make mistakes because people make mistakes. Sometimes their data is wrong. One of the things that drove me off of Brave Search to begin with is not that Brave Search was doing a bad job, but just that the stuff I was getting was so stupid. Like the results, like the actual pages I was reading, I'm like, well, that's dumb. Because I was doing things that are in my field, right? Like they're, like I was talking about, Apple stuff and iPhone and whatnot, and so I was usually looking for confirmation or the nudge of the one thing I'd forgotten, those kinds of things. So like I had a pretty good sense of what quality was, and I was not finding it. The stuff that was popping up in the search engines. So like it wasn't like the originals, the sources were necessarily good, which can result in bad AI responses, but I still want to be able to check them. To see, because sometimes, again, AI just, got some bad data somewhere and, put it together in a stupid way, and now you got some really incorrect stuff, and you need to check that. But most of the time, I don't care that much, right? I'm not, when I'm asking about what might be wrong with my refrigerator, I'm basically trying to determine, is this something I can fix myself, or do I need to call a repair person right away?
Right. And the chances that it's going to be super wrong on that is probably, well, it doesn't know your skill set. I mean, if you tell it that you have a sponge and a piece of electrical tape, and it's going to go, yeah, no, you can't do this.
But in fact, you can tell it your skill set, and it will take that into account. As opposed to having to watch a YouTube video and get 15 minutes in to determine that, no, the guy's not going to talk about your particular problem. Mm-hmm. So, the people who do YouTube videos on repair stuff, that is actually fabulous. But a lot of the time, it is not actually what you need because it's just a slightly different model, or, your particular problem is enough different, et cetera, et cetera. So, there are things like that where, but with the chatbots, the AI search engines, you can literally do things like, I'm having trouble taking this thing apart. Are there any tricks? And because it has the context of what you've been searching for all the way back, it can say, oh, well, yes, these kind of connectors, can be a problem, and, try doing X, Y, or Z. And again, sometimes like as someone, I do fix a fair amount of things. I mean, I'm not great at it. I'm usually successful, but it takes me a while. So
successful and great being two different things.
Yeah, meaning it would just like, oh, you do this, click, 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 and you're done. Successful is like an hour later, I finally beat it into submission. But a lot of times it really is the trick. Like it's that experience of, here's how you get it off. You know, like if you have to spend 15 minutes trying to figure out how to get one little piece off, then you feel you wasted a lot of time. Whereas something can just tell you, oh yeah, there's a little tab underneath you got to push. Thank you. You know, couldn't see the tab.
One of my favorite anecdotes is that I had somebody snapped off the antenna on my old 76 Honda Civic, and I went down to the store, bought another one, and I went onto the console and I unplugged the connector and I unscrewed it from the roof and I pulled the cable all the way out before I thought, boy, I bet my dad would have tied something to that before he pulled it out. And I called him and I told him that. And he said, Allison, how many times do you think I forgot to do that before I learned to always do that? And, I've never forgotten that again.
That's really true. I grew up on a farm, so I have a fair amount of those kind of skills. But as I said, particularly working with small stuff you can't see real well, it just, you just like, oh, just tell me the trick. And in fact, so just to go with the story, the fridge really did die on Monday. The guy who actually was able to come on Tuesday, which was great. Luckily it was cold enough to move everything outside and not have a problem because we live in.
We can't do that.
We don't live where you do that. Yeah, we don't live in sunny Southern California. But he actually determined that it was the control board that was the problem. And I watched him take it off, including these little clips that you had to like use pliers on. I'm like, oh, that would have taken me, I don't know how long to not realize those little clips.
A lot of times I think what we really want to know is, should I just pull harder or is that going to break it?
Yes. Because precisely. So in any event, so he eventually, he figures out the control board. He's looking it up on his phone and having a little trouble finding it. So I look it up on my phone in Repair Clinic and I find the thing and he's like, well, it'll be, $380, for the part and the service visit. And we can probably get it in 3 or 4 days. And, I can probably be back another couple days after that. And I'm like, a week without a fridge is not going to be fun. Looks like Repair Clinic can send it to me tomorrow. And I can put it in myself because I have watched you with the little clippy things. So
right.
So by Wednesday we had a working fridge again.
And so you had gotten to that point with using an AI search agent.
In that case, not. I'd gotten to the point of calling him.
It's a call repair person.
No, because I was like, okay, the various things that it's talking about are things I can't just solve with Repair Clinic. And it had mentioned the control board, but I was like, control board, like I don't do the electronic stuff. I mean, I'm good at plugging and playing, but if it's actually a dead control board, I don't know how to figure that out. And to be fair, like this guy, the repair guy was great. I mean, like he was looking up wiring diagrams and stuff like that, and he showed me on the back of the control board like there were 2 little dark spots at solder joints where things had probably gotten too hot at some point. Okay. And it's like, okay, and in the part that really pissed me off, I had power cycled the fridge multiple times at this point, right? Because that's what you do, because it's always just unplug it and plug it back in, right?
Right.
And so he unplugs the board, all the connectors from the control board, and he's looking at it in the back, and he puts it back together, and he plugs them all in, and the fridge starts working. I'm like, seriously, no, and there were no capacitors on it anywhere. There was no way it could have stored anything. I was like, I have had this thing sitting unplugged for a day, and when we plugged it in, to show him, it was still broken. So any event. So I still got the new control board and all that because I didn't trust it. But yeah. But it was very helpful. I didn't trust the old control board.
Yeah, you said I didn't trust him. I wanted to make sure we kept that clear. He was good.
Yeah, no, I did. No, I trusted him, but I didn't trust the old control board to keep working.
Right.
But again, getting to that point was the tricky part because I was like, well, it has these symptoms. Like, I can only tell you what the symptoms are, and that was a useful, and that was a discussion. It was not a keyword search.
Right. And the thing is that the ability to go back and forth with it, like you say, that you can go to Google search and search it for a term and it'll spit you out some answers, and then you want to ask the follow-on question, and you're starting from scratch again. It's sort of like talking to Siri. So, but with these chat clients, you can just say, okay, it assumes it knows all this information. I talked about on my show that I was asking a question, and it says, well, you could use Text Expander for that, and I see you've got it on your system. And I was like, what? How do you know that? And it says, because you told me. And it says, go back and look in your search history. And sure enough, I had said, I'm trying to make a Text Expander snippet that does this. And it basically keeps an inventory of everything you've ever told it.
Well, and in fact, I mean, one of the things as I'm starting to write about this, I'm actually going back and looking. Both Perplexity and ChatGPT keep sort of a library of your past searches, which is kind of interesting because, again, you might pick them up. Like I've gone back and continued a conversation because sometimes I don't want to start from scratch. I'd already had some discussion about something. I've gotten somewhere, and now I want to pick that up and go further. So that was it's kind of an interesting thing. The other thing that Perplexity does, which actually I've been finding more and more helpful, is it suggests like 4 or 5 prompts to continue. Like it's helping you continue the conversation.
Oh yeah, it'll say, "Did you want to know a little bit more about this thing I just told you?"
Yeah, and so I've been finding that more and more that's actually been useful for certain kinds of like open-ended things where I'm like, "Tell me about this. I don't really know very much about this," and it will tell me something, and then it will make some suggestions later on that actually are not bad.
Now, in your musings as you're working on this topic, you were starting to talk about this as a cultural technology. Can you expand on what you mean by that?
Yeah, so there's a woman named Alison Gopnik came up with this term, and she's arguing that generative AI, in essence, because it's been trained on everything it can possibly find, is a cultural technology in the sense that we are using it to extract information, extract specific bits and pieces of human knowledge. Right?
Okay.
I mean, in that sense, it's sort of like Wikipedia. I mean, Wikipedia is a large collection of human knowledge. And when we go and read an article about something in Wikipedia, we're extracting that information from the sum total of human knowledge that's been recorded in Wikipedia. And it was an interesting way of thinking about it because it gets away from a little bit of the intelligent agent concept, which I've had more trouble with. I mean, I haven't yet seen any of the agenty stuff where it's like doing something that feels like it maybe makes sense to me. That why would you have something do this? Like they've given examples of like book me plane tickets. I was like, I barely trust myself to book plane tickets. I'm not going to trust some random, like every time I book a plane flight, I'm like, well, let's see if there's a cheaper one. What about this? What if I did these other hours?
That's the wrong seat. That's a stopover at a weird place. That's too close.
How could it possibly know those things about me when I barely know them about myself? And I don't even know them until I'm presented with something. I'm like, oh, that doesn't seem like a good time. That just it feels problematic to me in that regard. Whereas this way of plumbing human knowledge. I mean, what's Google if not this grand sum of human knowledge that you could ask, you can search for bits and pieces of. Well, now we're not searching for the bits and pieces. We're asking questions of it, which is sort of the same thing with a jump.
I see what you're saying. Because we're having a conversation with it, not giving it, Audacity envelope tool version 3.7.1. We're asking it, I remember, hey, I want to change the volume of a track and I want to put control points in it. And I'm using Audacity. How do I do that?
I was just helping a friend controlling his Mac remotely, and he'd been doing something where he'd been doing something. He'd been receiving spam that triggered more spam to a web forum that I create, that I manage. And I was like, how are you doing this? And so I sort of figured it out. I mean, I knew roughly what was going on, but he uses Apple Mail, which I don't. And it was I'm sort of on the spot, like we're literally talking and I'm controlling his computer and I'm like, oh, man, how do you find the freaking raw source of an email message in Apple Mail? And so I just asked ChatGPT and it told me. And I'm like, okay, thank you. Now I know. Yes, I could have done a search in Google and probably found 3 or 4 things that might have told me if I went and read them. But I just needed to know what the menu structure was to get to that command. And there were a couple of other little things like that because I'm not as familiar with Apple Mail as I could be because it's not the app I use. And so to be able to get to that information, again, I wanted answers. I didn't want references.
Yeah, right.
Right?
It's doing the same thing. It's going off and reading and finding all of these references, like you say, but then it's telling us the answer in the way we need to hear it, not the way it was typed into a web page the day the person wrote it.
And keep in mind, the answer may come from a web page that has almost nothing to do with what you're interested in.
Or it's WikiHow. You can't see Adam, but his head is exploding as I said that. I mean, I just hate it. And they always come up to the top, too. That's the thing that drives me crazy. And it's literally never the one I want to read.
Precisely. So yeah, so that's just it. Is that like particularly when you're searching for something? I mean, that's in some ways a sort of bad example because that probably would have come up relatively quickly in a search. But there's sometimes you're looking for something which no one's written an article about this. It's not that interesting. It's some little piece that you're going to find referenced in something else. I mean, I do this a lot in tidbits. I don't know if anyone notices or appreciates, or if the search engines notice or appreciate, or the chatbots notice or appreciate. I like to try to put additional information into articles. So like the answer, I'm writing about something, but I will mention other things on the way to getting there so that those are recorded in a place that they can be found or just kind of absorbed by the reader. Readers going, oh, they have an article about such and such, such and such. And by the time they're done, they also know these 3 or 4 other little facts, which weren't absolutely necessary to know to get to the end, but they're there now.
I think about this a lot because when I go to a YouTube video to see how to do X, and I'm taking that link, all I want is that.
Yeah.
When I go to a recipe, all I want is the recipe. But when I write, I'm the person who's going to tell you the story of how I got there. I am the exact opposite of the person whose site I would ever want to look for to find out. Like, else, and I've started teasing myself in my own article saying, so anybody else would say, click here, 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 there's the answer to your question. But that's not what I'm going to do today. Let's start back in 1958 when I was born. And I'm going to tell you how I got to this point and told this story today. But I do feel like giving that context can be important to helping people understand why the answer is what it is.
It's a fine line because, right, you don't want to go back to 1958, but you do want to provide some context. And the food blogs are actually a good example of that. So in the last couple of years, I've become a huge fan of Deb Perlman and Smitten Kitchen. Sorry, I cannot get that right. My wife and I made that mistake very early on and calling it Smitten Kitten, and now we can't stop.
We do stuff like that. We always talk about avocado's number instead of Avogadro's number.
Yes, precisely. So make a great guacamole for Smitten Kitchen with that. But any event, she does a wonderful job of having a small amount of a lead up or verbiage before the recipe, and so that you will read it and it's amusing and entertaining and well written, and again additional facts show up in there. Whereas most of the time when I go to a food blog, I am mashing that jump to recipe button as fast as I can. because I do not want to hear what hubby and the kids think of it. So
I open up the app Paprika and I tell it to import the recipe, and I get that immediately.
Well, I don't let Paprika import anything until I've gotten to make sure the recipe's okay. So that's the problem. So that's part of it. But in any event, yes. So I think it is a fine line. But this is a little bit of kind of, again, what we're looking for. I mean, someone was complaining to me recently, or commenting on Tibbet's talk, about how they did a search for, I think it was like HP printer help. And then they called the phone number that Google got, and it was a scammer.
Oh, no.
And I'm like, that's a Google fail. Like, how could Google possibly not put up an official phone number? And I did the search and I got official phone numbers. But it just goes to show there's no real answer anymore. Everything's a little fuzzy. It's personalized and customized and a little different. So who knows what this person had searched for in the past, such that Google thought differently about giving them a scammer rather than the right answer. Oh, he really likes the scammers. Okay, then.
When you were talking, we were texting back and forth or emailing. When you were talking about this idea of a cultural technology, you quoted the woman you just referred to, Alison Gopnik from UC Berkeley, and she told the story of the stone soup. And that really struck me as a way to explain what you're talking about a cultural technology with AI. Can you just talk through what she wrote? And I'll put a link in the show notes to her article.
A little bit. I actually didn't. I mean, the stone soup analogy didn't quite work as well for me. But basically the idea was, I mean, the stone soup fable is, people come to a traveler comes to a village and he's like, hey, let's make some soup, and people are like, oh, we don't have anything, and he's like, well, I've got these magic stones. And, he puts the stones in a pot with some water and, oh, boy, this would be great if we just had, a carrot or two. And one's like, oh, I got a carrot, and by the end, the people have provided all of the parts to actually make a really good soup. And I think what she's suggesting is that that we are adding all the little bits and pieces to make generative AI actually useful. We're turning it into soup by providing all of the extra little bits. Oh, wouldn't it be nice if it knew about such and such? Wouldn't it be great if it was trained on that? I'm going to tell it about my issue over here. And just everything sort of goes into the pot. So, and what you end up with is more valuable than what you put in into parts and pieces.
I like that perspective. I'm also choosing to use Claude because it's not training on what I'm asking it. And
that's
so
usually an option for most of them at this point.
Well, yeah. Well, it's opt out on some of them. Like on ChatGPT, it's opt out, but on Claude, it's opt in. And so I'm choosing not to train it on my own data, but I probably could, because asking stupid questions about how to write something in jQuery is probably not a national secret I need to protect.
It is an interesting question, and like I've been using this Lex word processor, which is kind of it's got a chat bot attached to it. You can ask it questions about what you're writing at all times, and you can feed it context. In other words, like say, go to these, include as context these web pages, and in this PDF I've uploaded and things like that, and and it's not doing a sharing stuff, but someone was like, oh, aren't you worried about putting what you're writing, into a chatbot where you can't control it? And I'm like, everything I write is for public. I mean, like literally published, so, no, I'm not in the slightest bit concerned about that. If I was writing, my journal, that I didn't want anyone to read ever, I probably wouldn't put it into even an online word processor. But you have to figure out whether or not you actually care about some of these things, because it is a little bit about providing the carrot for the soup.
Right. Yeah. One of the things I was thinking about with this is there was a study done recently looking at the level of drop-off in information being provided to Stack Overflow over the course of time and mapping when AI started to kick in. And so there has been a steady decline in the number of people participating in the information that's being added to Stack Overflow. Has been at a fairly constant rate going down. But the minute ChatGPT hits the market, it just plummets. And they did a good job of doing a comparison study in other countries where ChatGPT is not available, and the drop-off did not happen at that point.
Yeah.
So they're fairly confident of the data that they had. But they part of it was like, well, wait a minute, does that mean we won't have new information if we stop contributing? But what they found was that this drop-off was in languages that are fully established. And so they said, if you look back at JavaScript, it's been around a long time. They've got HTML's pretty much figured out.
Right.
People are just asking the same questions over and over again, and people are answering the same thing or saying, "Oh, you should go to this answer. It's already been answered. Oh, go to this answer. It's already been answered."
Interesting.
But if you look at some of the newer languages, they aren't seeing that kind of drop off. So that gave me a little bit of confidence that maybe what we're doing right now is I'm writing an article about how to turn on some accessibility feature in system settings on Mac OS, but you've already written it up, and Mac Rumors or somebody, one of the other sites has already written it up, and it's probably written up 100,000 different places. Maybe that's not what we need to be doing anymore, because that information's no longer. You could just ask an AI about it, because the world knowledge exists. Shut up, talk about something new.
Yeah, well, we can always hope. I mean, the cultural well is deep and is getting deeper, but it is definitely a situation where, pretty much anything you think of writing about has been written about already. Very quickly, my wife's aunt is a cookbook writer and has been since the 70s, and she's written many cookbooks. And she said this is Google. Google was what got it for her. It's like she's like, I can type in, basically the ingredients I want to have, and I'm thinking of a new recipe, and someone's already made it. Like,
so
she
there
used
was
to
no
invent
point then?
recipes, right? Well, she's used to invent recipes, but it turns out there are no new recipes, in some basic fashion, So again, what the Google's was one too is, it's a cultural technology. It's giving us access to the human knowledge, and the chatbots are just a slightly different approach to that. But yeah, that said, I still believe you want to be careful about when you ask them for recipes. They don't really taste so well.
Well, I know, Adam, you and I both like to be precise and have data and analysis. And we've basically made this a discussion of, boy, this is a squishy thing now.
So squishy. Gonna have to learn to live with uncertainty.
Oh, that's uncomfortable. Well, thanks for coming on. As always, this is always a blast. And everybody should go to tidbits.com and read. I assume there's going to be an article on this subject coming out eventually, as
sooner or later.
Resolve the squishy bits.
Yeah, right. Once I come up with the answer, we'll be good.
All right. We'll talk to you again soon.
Oh, thank you.
Well, that is going to wind us up for this week. Did you know you can email me at allison@podfeet.com anytime you like? If you have a question or a suggestion, just send it on over. Remember, everything good starts with podfeet.com. You can follow me on Mastodon at podfeet.com/Mastodon. If you want to listen to the podcast on YouTube, like all the cool kids do now, you can go to podfeet.com/YouTube. If you want to join in the conversation, you can join our Slack community, which is hoppin' fun at podfeet.com/Slack. You can talk to me in there and all of the other lovely NoSilla castaways. You can support the show at podfeet.com/Patreon, as I mentioned earlier, or with a one-time donation. You can do that at podfeet.com/donate and use Apple Pay or any credit card. Or you can use podfeet.com/PayPal for one-time donations. And if you want to join in the fun of the live show, head on over to podfeet.com/live on Sunday nights at 5 p.m. Pacific time and join the friendly and enthusiastic NoSilla castaways. If you'd been here tonight, you would have gotten to talk to my grandchildren, and I know all of you wish you'd been there. Anyway, thanks for listening, and stay subscribed.